Welcome, adventurers. If you're like me, you have to put in some pretty serious effort into most things that you do. Nothing really comes naturally, and it's all about hard work and dedication. And then waltzes in the Sorcerer, casting spells everywhere because, oh, it's just my genetics. Freaking sorcerers. Welcome to Rebel Then King. Today, we are talking about those who are just born with it, the Sorcerer. Sorcerers are charisma-based spellcasters. They have training in simple weapons, no armor proficiency, and just 6 hit points per level. They're trained into a number of skills equal to 2 plus their intelligence modifier, though they do also pick up training in a skill from their bloodline. The Bloodlines are the subclass system for the Sorcerer, and I think there are 15 if I counted right. There are a lot of Bloodlines. We'll talk about what those Bloodlines do for the Sorcerer. They are important. We'll also talk about some of the core mechanics that we honestly sometimes kind of gloss over, like spontaneous versus prepared caster, because it really is worth talking about with this class. Okay, so let's get into the Bloodlines. When reading about your bloodline, the first thing you'll notice is that the bloodline will actually change which spell casting tradition you use. You can be either an arcane, a divine, occult, or a primal caster as a sorcerer. The second thing you're going to do is you will gain access to a unique focus spell, which is called your bloodline spell. When you cast your bloodline spell, your focus spell, you unlock something called blood magic. We'll get into the details about that in a second. It is important to note that this really is, at least tries to be, the defining feature of the Sorcerer. You see, Sorcerers are not the only charisma-based casters for sure. They are not the only spontaneous casters, but the blood magic is something that is unique to them. So let's take a look at some of those bloodline spell effects now. Again, in general, when you cast your bloodline spell, you then can unlock your blood magic. It's a short-lived, usually just 1 round effect. Let's take a look at some of those now. For example, as the genie, when you cast your focus spell, you can either grant yourself a +1 bonus to deception checks or impose a -1 penalty to perception on the target of the spell. As the nymph, you can either give yourself a +1 bonus to your diplomacy, or you can impose a -1 penalty on the will saves of the target. And then finally, as the undead, you can either gain some temporary HP from casting the spell, or you can add 1 point of additional damage. And as a sorcerer, you really do want to make sure you read and understand and plan to use your blood magic. This can mean making sure you invest some other feats, training, skills as needed to make the best use of that blood magic. For example, as the elemental sorcerer, well, you get a +1 bonus to intimidation checks when you use your bloodline spell. This means it might make sense to take something like intimidating glare, so that when you cast your focus spell and you go to intimidate something, well, you don't have that -4 penalty if you don't speak the same language as the target. So as you are building out your sorcerer and you're leveling up, make sure to consider your blood magic and get the best use out of it. It is, after all, what makes you, you. Now, when discussing the sorcerer, I do think it is important to get into the difference between spontaneous and prepared casting. This could have been done earlier. We have looked at spontaneous casters before, but I think it's most important with the sorcerer. Okay, so what is spontaneous casting? As a sorcerer, you learn 2 spells plus 1 from your bloodline. That's 3 total spells at level 1, and you have 3 level 1 spell slots. So let's say you know Heal, Burning Hands, and Fear. In any day, you can use those spells in any combination you like. You can use all 3 once. You could cast Heal 3 times. You could do Burning Hands twice and Fear once. Any combination is valid. Now let's contrast that with a prepared caster like the wizard. The wizard knows more spells. They will learn 5 spells plus 1 from their magic school for most wizards. So that's double. And they also will have 3 spell slots. The difference is in every single adventuring day, that wizard will need to pick which of their spells they are going to use in their spell slots and how many times they would want to use them. So to use those same 3 spells as an example, if a wizard thinks they're going to cast Fear twice in a day and Burning Hands once, they need to prepare 2 spell slots with Fear and 1 with Burning Hands. And it means they wouldn't be able to cast Heal that day. I mean, they wouldn't anyway because it's not on their spell list, but you get it. And all of this means, at least to me, that a spontaneous spellcaster is a lot simpler to play than a prepared spellcaster. First of all, when you are building out your character initially, you have fewer spells to choose. I mean, maybe making those choices would be a little bit harder, but you just kind of learn 3 spells, you pick 3, you learn the intricacies of those, and you're done. And then second, on every single adventuring day, which, might be every session, it might be every other session, it might be multiple times in a session, depending on how your sessions go, you don't need to make any decisions. That prepared caster, every time they rest for the night, then wake up, they've got to think about, what might I encounter today? What has been working? What hasn't been working? I need to make sure I very, very carefully pick which spells I'm going to use, how many times I'm going to use them. Spontaneous caster, you just get out of bed and you get going. And for these reasons, I think that the spontaneous casters, like the Sorcerer, are a really good choice for beginners. But honestly, it's not just limited to beginners. I see a lot of intermediate and advanced players choose them as well. And finally, why I think it's so important to discuss this when talking about the Sorcerer. The Sorcerer, again, is not the only spontaneous caster, but I think they are the most powerful spontaneous caster. They have the most spell slots of the spontaneous casters in the system, which means they sit at a really sweet spot in terms of relative ease of play and relative power, and I think that's what makes them a pretty popular choice. Now, the only potential downside I really see of the Sorcerer is that they don't truly have a big defining feature. I know I talked about blood magic and bloodline spells and how that is big and important. That's what makes you you and everything. But frankly, I do find a fair amount of the blood magic and even the bloodline spells to be kind of underwhelming. You see, the blood magic effects, they only last 1 round. That's not a very long time. And some of them are pretty niche, or they just probably won't be useful all that often. And for this reason, I see a lot of people, A, just ignore their bloodline spell totally, and then B, if they do use their bloodline spell, they don't use their blood magic at all. So it can't really be a defining feature if almost no players playing as that class actually use it. Now, if you compare that to the extra heal slots that a cleric has access to, or the Bard's Inspire Courage, no players playing as those classes forget or don't use those features, at least none that I've seen or played alongside. So that does leave me sometimes wondering, if you're not getting anything big and defining, or at least you're not making use of it while playing as a sorcerer, what really are you getting out of the class? But I suppose maybe that is a bit of the trade-off of being a bit of a generalist. Again, they can cast from every single spell list. That's pretty cool. They are spontaneous and they're relatively powerful. So yeah, I think they're a bit of a jack of all trades and a master of none. Well, there we have it. Great power, but with absolutely none of the responsibility. Just pretty simple mechanics that are relatively powerful. Because of this combination of ease, simplicity, and relative power, I feel like I need to give the Sorcerer a 7 out of 10 times that you cast your bloodline spell and then just totally forget about blood magic. It happens a lot. So who out there has played as a Sorcerer? I know some of you have, because pretty much every time I tune into an actual play, I do see someone using a sorcerer. My question to you is, do you make sure to get the best use out of your bloodline spell and blood magic, or do you sort of let it fall to the wayside? Let me know in the comments. Until then, just keep skipping those rehearsals, practices, team meetings, prep sessions, because, you don't need them. You just wake up and you're good to go. Just try to stay out of the way of the wizard. They're really cranky. They pulled an all-nighter studying their spell book or something like that. It's not anything you ever have to worry about.